We measured the return on investment. So we know that these were in fact the highest return on investments we did. We are back live in the Sales Lab. Good to see you all. Welcome to all the sales scientists joining us online live now. And if you're watching this in the replay as well, hello to you. My name is David Premer, founder and chief sales scientist over here at Cerebral Selling. And this is going to be a good one. I say this all the time. This is going to be a good talk today. This is going to be actually an especially good one because in this day and age where, we're living in kind of this post-pandemic world where we're all trying to figure out what kind of customer events can we run that are going to give us the most bang for our buck. This session is one you're going to want to listen to. Now, this is kind of it's funny how I arrived at this particular topic and this particular kind of set of learnings as well. And before I get into, now the topic, just to kind of frame it up here, as I have the title slide, the highest ROI customer event we ran at Salesforce. And what do I mean by that? Return on investment, meaning what was the maximum amount of money that we ended up making from customers, at the end of the day, having attended an event based on that return on investment, meaning we spend a little bit of money, but we maximize the amount of revenue that we were able to get from the customers who attended that event. That's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about putting on big lavish events and kind of generating revenue from that. We're talking about the biggest return on investment. But before we actually get into the event itself, it's really important to understand the science and the principle behind these events and why they were so powerful. Now, and by the way, for those of you who are joining live, welcome. You can feel free to comment or post something in the feed here as well. I will be able to see it and answer any questions you have. But so here's the thing, and I'm going to approach this from two standpoints. The first standpoint is the standpoint of empathy, which I'm a big fan of. And the second one is science. What does the science tell us about the kinds of events that actually engage customers and kind of engender them to want to engage with us? So here's the kind of the setup. So I joined Salesforce because they acquired my company. And I have been a Salesforce customer, a few times. And so all of a sudden, I kind of find myself on the other side of the wall, in the kind of the inner circle here at Salesforce. And I'm looking at all the events, and don't get me wrong, Salesforce is killer when it comes to putting out these awesome, high quality, high production value events. Better than any company I've ever seen. But here's the thing. Oftentimes when we drive customers to events, they can sometimes be thinly veiled product pitches. And I think you know what I mean by that. It's come to our event, and I'm sure maybe you do this at your company. Come to our event to learn about the future of whatever, whatever it is that you do, right? Come to learn about the future of whatever. And, we drop some knowledge. Hey, look, here's what's happening in the future. Here's what's happening now. Here's the change that's happening in the market. And if you want to be successful, you have to be really well positioned to, capitalize on these changes. I get all that. And then there's kind of as a customer, I'm waiting for the punchline. And the punchline is the last few slides we're oh, and now we've released this new product and it's going to help solve all these problems. And you're there we go. There was the pitch. Now look, there are times when pitching your product is totally fine and makes a lot of sense. And in fact, there are events where customers expect to be pitched products. We did lots of events at Salesforce where we were trying to get Salesforce admins to come and show up because as a Salesforce administrator, part of your job at your company is to be really smart about Salesforce and to learn about the latest products and features and demos and all that kind of stuff. And so when they showed up, that's what they wanted, right? But what I'm talking about here is how do we engage executive buyers, decision makers. Oftentimes the people that we're talking about at the functional technical level are definitely influencers, but how do we engage these higher level buyers? So this thinly veiled product pitch kind of event is something that's very common in the technology space and spaces in general. And the funny thing is that customers almost expect when they sign up for these events that there's going to be that product pitch at the end. And to be honest, they're kind of used to it, but it also detracts a little bit from the value. So knowing this and kind of having been a Salesforce customer and kind of now being inside the hive, I was every event we do is kind of a little bit of a thinly veiled product pitch. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, but, can we do better? So that's the empathy piece. The science piece behind why doing better has such a huge impact on conversion rates comes down to a scientific principle known as reciprocity. And reciprocity is kind of like this simple, kind of exchange-based philosophy where it's like, if I do something nice for you, then you feel kind of like micro-indebted and want to do something nice for me in exchange, right? This quid pro quo. But the trick is, and I don't have time to get on into all the science now because I do talk about it in my book, the trick is that you actually have to do something nice for someone first in advance, right? Almost with no expectation of them doing something nice for you, because if there's like a string attached, then it doesn't really feel genuine. And I'll just kind of frame this up with some fun slideage here. I'm a big fan of science. This is a study that was published in the Journal of Applied Psychology. And what it was meant to do was to kind of uncover some of the secret science behind how people in the service industry, specifically waiters and servers at restaurants, can earn more tips. And what did they find? Well, they found that, let's say, for example, you're at the end of your meal and you get a little mint, right, on your bill. They found that when the servers gave their customers a mint on their bill, that their tips increased 3%, right? Pretty good. So they said, okay, well, what happens if we're even more generous? Like, what happens if we actually add another candy to the mix here, right? Like another candy. Tips increase 14%. And the idea is kind of simple, right? It's like, I've given you a gift, and now I've given you like an even bigger gift, and now you feel kind of indebted to me. And now I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking to yourself, okay, well, what about 3 candies? Now, they didn't do 3 candies, and what I'm going to do here, just for fun, I'm going to move my head over to the side, just so you can see the build. But so they didn't do the 3 candies. What they did was something very interesting, and this is really important as it comes down to this idea of reciprocity, is they did what I refer to as the 1+1. So imagine this, you're at the restaurant, you're finished your meal, you get the bill, there's these candies, and the server takes a candy out of their pouch, wherever they keep the candies, and they drop one on the check as they drop them off to you. And then they kind of, turn to walk away, and then they come back and they reach into their little pocket of candies and pull out an extra one, right? And drop it on the bill in front of you, as though they're saying, hey, look, I don't do this for everyone, right? But you're special, so I'm going to do it for you, right? That's what I refer to as the 1+1. What do they find? Tips increase 23%. So that's pretty significant, right? 23% increase in tips. And why does this happen? It happens because all of a sudden the staff the customers feel that like not everyone gets this treatment, and I'm getting this like very special treatment, because I am who I am, and the customer wants to make a good or the waiter wants to make a good impression, all this kind of stuff. So it's this idea of reciprocity, very, very powerful. Now, what I want to do is kind of now bring this back to the events. Like, what was the actual customer event that we ran that had such a very high ROI? So here was the event. They were customer dinners, okay? But not just any customer dinners. I'll tell you, like, here I'll lay out, like, here's what we did. We said we want to run these customer dinners for a specific kind of customer profile. So I was running small business for the Eastern U.S., so I wanted C-level executives at these small business customers. And we went into some of the cities that we had a bigger presence in, like New York City, but we also went into, in Boston, but we also went into some of the kind of the smaller jurisdictions like the Pittsburghs and Cincinnati's, Raleigh, North Carolinas, and so on. And what we said, the directive to our team was, we want you to go out and invite, we only have like 12, 13, 15, 17 spots, right, at this customer dinner. And we want you to go out and we want you to target the C-level executives from your customer base at your dinners, and to invite them to these dinners. And we're going to position it as just an opportunity to connect, to meet fellow CEOs and fellow C-level executives. And they were hosted by me. Now, what kind of the way the team positioned me as was said, hey, look, they're hosted by our VP, David Premer. And David, he was acquired. He used to be just like you. He was a small business customer, and then his company was acquired by Salesforce. Now he's on the inside, and he's done a bunch of startups. So he's kind of like you, and he's a great person to talk to. He can give you some advice and tell you what it's like to be on the inside of Salesforce. And we positioned it as strictly 100%, value-added stuff, right? And of course, customers are still a little skeptical, like, okay, like, is this really going to be good or not? But we were able to fill these dinners, let's say with plus or minus 15 people. We want to keep it intimate. Okay. Now here's the kind of the trick with the dinners. We want to keep it intimate, but we had a theme for these dinners. The idea wasn't just to show up and pitch the product. In fact, the idea was to show up and not even talk about Salesforce at all. So these executives would show up, and I would kind of start off and I would say, hey, look, thank you for coming. We know that being an executive at a fast growth company is really, really tough. And one of the most important things that you're probably challenged with is focus, right? Like what do we start doing, stop doing, continue doing? Like where do we spend our time? And I totally hear you. Look, it's a big thing for me at Salesforce. It was a big thing for me when I was in your shoes growing my small business and I was actually acquired by Salesforce. I totally get it. Focus is really, really tough. Now, one of my favorite books, this is part of the narrative, right, that I would talk to these execs about. One of the part of the narrative was like one of my favorite books is this book called The One Thing. I'm a big fan. I have, hold on a sec, I got a bunch of copies here. This used to be, it's called The One Thing, The Surprisingly Simple Truth Behind Extraordinary Results. It was standard reading for my teams at Salesforce. I used to buy copies at my desk, even after Salesforce, buy copies of this book, put it at my desk, and I would just say like, take one. In fact, if you were a new hire, you got a copy of this book in addition to another one, just because focus, prioritization, it's just a great, life book. So we started out the narrative saying, hey, look, focus, prioritization is really, really hard. And one of my favorite books is this book called The One Thing. And in The One Thing, they talk about this concept of a focusing question, which is, what's one thing I could do such that everything else that potentially would be on my plate would be made easier or unnecessary. So that's the idea behind the focusing question of The One Thing. And so I kind of laid it out, and we did two more things at these dinners as I go back to my slides. So what you're going to see, so this is actually a shot that I was able to dig up as I move my head around here. I was able to dig up from one of the dinners we hosted in New York City. This very nice, Japanese kind of steak and sushi restaurant. And we had this, like, you can see, like, very lovely, intimate, private room. Private room is actually really important for this. And by the way, well, I'll talk about it in a second. Okay, what if you're not into doing live events like this? What do you do in the post-pandemic world? But what I did was I talked about this book, The One Thing, and how important focus on prioritization was. And then, for whatever reason, it's coming back to this. Hold on a sec. I'm just going to fast forward through the slides. And then, okay, maybe I don't have it in this particular deck. A build. So, and then what I did was, you can see on the table here, what I'll do just for fun, I will move my head is now blocking the books, and I will move my head back out of the way so you can see. But you can see those white books on the desk. Those are copies of The One Thing. And we bought copies of The One Thing for all the participants. We said, look, this is really, really tough. Again, like, think about the investment here. A dinner and a bunch of books, right? We said, look, focus on prioritization, really tough. I love this book. I bought a copy for all of you, so I want you to take it home and read it. But tonight, what I want to do is I want to talk about, like, what's your one thing, right? Like, what is the one thing for you and your business that as you're thinking about growth, focus, people, culture, your market, what's going on in the world, like, what is your one thing such that if you fix this or address it, everything else would be easier or unnecessary. And by the way, and we said ground rules, we don't want you to talk about Salesforce tonight. That's not the point of this dinner. It's just to meet helpful people, to ask whatever questions you want, and to talk about focus and prioritization, because it's something we all struggle with. And what we did was, at the beginning, we would have like a mixer and drinks, and like people would mingle and talk and all that kind of stuff. But once we sat down at the dinner, it was quiet. It was a quiet, facilitated conversation where basically like we went around the table one by one. People introduced themselves, and I said, I want you to introduce yourself. I want you to say like who you are, what you do, what your company does, and then what is your one thing, right? What is your one thing at your company? And by the way, this is a facilitated conversation. When someone brought something up, we're focused on this. I'm like, Steve and Jessica, you mentioned you were focused on that in your businesses. Like, how are you addressing that? And it was quiet, meaning there was no cross chatter. It wasn't like, I'm talking to the person next to me. And, of course, at business dinners, sometimes you kind of feel like sometimes you get stuck talking to the person next to you because there's just all this chatter. It was like a quiet study group, right? All of these conversations happening back and forth, tons of value. And it actually would take us the whole length of the meal, including dessert, 2-3 hours to basically get through everything, right? So we had this really intimate, great conversation We added so much value, and we never pitched our products or services once, right? And then they leave and they go home. And the reps who attended these dinners with me, they're like, oh my gosh, like everyone was raving about how much value they got. This was so great. People are like, hugging, kissing, shaking hands, like whatever. And then what happens is everyone goes home. The reps are like, oh my gosh, like is it this simple? Like you just host a dinner and give them some books and facilitate a conversation and they find it really valuable. Like, yes, you don't have to pitch anything, right? And so what happens is they go home. And we built up so much value with them, so much reciprocity, that when it came time to be like the end of month, end of quarter, we wanted our deals to get signed and these kinds of things. These C-level executives responded to us, right? They answered our calls. And in fact, I would have reps who are like, I can't believe I've been trying to chase down the CEO like forever, and now they're just picking up the phone and taking my call, right? Because we added so much value. They know what it is that we do. We know we're in sales at Salesforce and we're trying to sell them stuff at the end of the day, but not that day, right? That day was all about adding value to them. Now, part of the challenge is when we run our events, just in general at companies, it's a little bit of like give and take, and sometimes meaning like a little bit of value, a little bit of selling, right? But what happens is over the course of time, sometimes we basically train our customers to expect the product pitch. And that's not a good look for us, right? Like, and in fact, sometimes it's not the first event that's the most successful, it's the subsequent events, because the first event where they actually realize that there was value, they start telling their friends like, oh, you should go to these customer dinners at Salesforce because they're actually adding a ton of value and they're not pitching anything in the end. So we start to double down on this model. And when you think about like, what is the cost of an event these days, where you're paying for like now live event, where you're paying for like the venue and speakers and lights and all that kind of stuff, it can be quite a lot. These were very economical events, right? Because all you're doing is you're basically buying dinner at a nice restaurant for 10, 15 people. Look, it costs money. It's not nothing, but it wasn't a ton. And then books. And then, of course, as reps, as VPs, as sales leaders, like we made a concerted effort just to be in those locations, in those cities for meetings and events. We would schedule around things where we were already there. So it was very, very convenient. And that had the highest ROI, because you think about it, maybe it cost us $2,000, $3,000 for these events, but the return that we got, right? Like thinking about selling multiple customers, tens of thousands of dollars in deals, we measured the return on investment. It was higher than Dreamforce, which again, Dreamforce is a massive multi-bajillion dollar event. And of course, it's great to get people there. People have to pay to come there. In this case, it allowed us to get out to where our customers were, add a ton of value, and they took our calls at the end of the day, all because of this principle of reciprocity. Now, one question I was actually talking to a group at Salesforce about this a couple of days ago, and they said, hey, David, this is amazing, but what if we can't do customer dinners, right? Like, with everything going on, we can't get out to see people. What do we do? And my whole thing to them was like, you can still do the same thing. You can just do it like virtually. Now, of course, you're not going to have a virtual dinner. You're not going to get 3 hours, 4 hours of time out of people. But if you said, hey, look, we're going to have like a 45-minute, like 1 hour group. It's going to be, for example, all executives at companies just like you in your industry that you maybe don't know from, different parts of the country or whatever it is, our territory. And we're going to bring a guest facilitator in to kind of drive this conversation. It can be just as valuable. Again, you want to have a consistent audience. So great, if your audience is all CMOs, make it all CMOs. But the second you have all CMOs and then like a marketing manager or a Salesforce admin or just someone who doesn't have the same role, it dilutes the kind of the quality of the event. So you want to make sure that the complexion of the people that you're driving to the event is a consistent one. You want to make sure that you have like a theme, something you're going to talk about, something that's going to be able to add value, and certainly something like, being able to send someone a book. You can still do that in a remote context. Again, you go into Amazon, you send people books, super, super simple, right? Have someone facilitate and keep it focused, right? And like I said, it might take an event or 2 or 3 until people kind of catch on that, hey, look, this is a valuable thing. And they start telling their friends, hey, look, you should come to these Salesforce events. But again, the trick is that it should be no strings attached. We don't ask for anything. We don't do any selling at the event, right? This is not an opportunity for us to kind of, to ask for things. It's just to give. So that is my 2 cents for today. The highest are, we measured the return on investment. So we know that these were in fact the highest return on investments we did. So my advice to you is, as you're planning your customer events, inject a little bit of that empathy for what the customer journey looks and feels like, and inject a little bit of the science of reciprocity. There's tons of other ways that you can generate reciprocity in your sales motion. I actually talk a lot about them on my YouTube channel. Maybe we'll do more here in the lab in the weeks and months to come. But even when you're prospecting, when you're reaching out to customers cold, there's tons of stuff that you can do that will drive and trigger this sense of reciprocity. It is such a pervasive psychological phenomenon that permeates so many modern sales tactics and sales motions. And I say this kind of fortunately or unfortunately, the bar is so low, everyone. Like, the bar is so low because there are so many horrible drive-by sales pitches, thinly veiled product pitch events. So just try something small. Doesn't even have to be expensive. Again, if you're doing this virtually, it almost may not cost you anything. It may just cost you books and your Zoom license, right? Like, there's no dinner or anything to be had. So start and just focus on adding value, and you will see the massive impact it will have on the return on investment of your customer events. So that is my Sales Lab Live for today. I hope you enjoyed the session, and I look forward to seeing you again in the future at another Sales Lab Live. Have a great day, everyone.